if you do have them in regards to tonight's session, but also things that might be just on your mind. Certainly opportunity to post it into the chat or ask out loud as the session goes on. There'll be a Q&A opportunity later on. So I thank you for being here. I thank Nathan, as always, for leading this work, and our team, for offering these types of supports. And we just hope that they are things that are helpful for you as parents. And if there's anything else that you need support in, to please make sure you include it into the chat or feedback later on. So thank you so much, and I'm hoping this is informational and supportive of your needs. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Mike. And before we begin, I just want to highlight that the presentation slides are available to download, and you can even follow along on your device if you'd like during the presentation. So if you go to the District 25 website, the same website you went to find the Zoom link, you'll find a link now to access the presentation slides, and they are available in Chinese and in Spanish as well as English. Okay. So, and I'll be putting this in the chat throughout the evening for anyone that joins late. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Nathan to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Louis, and thank you, Dr. D'Antona, for supporting the students in the district and the families of special education students. And that is, one of the highlights of our district is that we are trying to support with more information, more knowledge, and I appreciate and thank all the parents who joined tonight. Hopefully this will be informative for you as we go through the IEP process and the different components of the IEP. This is the first in a series of workshops for School District 25. And today's title is Understanding Your Child's IEP, a review of the different IEP components and sections. So we're going to take some time and go section by section of the IEP and give a little information, background understanding of what that section means, what you should be seeing in that section. And then please feel free if you have any questions about anything that I'm saying. I'm not following the chat while we're going along, but please put your questions in the chat, and then we'll make sure to have time at the end of the presentation to review the chat and see if there's any questions, and you'll have a chance to either just unmute and ask your questions live as well, and we'll try to address that. So my name is Nathan Yakubov. I'm the Administrator of Special Education for District 25. I work directly under the superintendent in the superintendent's office, and I support the district, both our schools and our families, with any issues surrounding evaluations for special education, any special education services, assistive technology concerns or issues, as well as placement, whether it be in our community schools or if a child needs District 75 placement as well, we would support with that and help with that. My contact information is right there on the slide. If you ever need to reach me, email is the easiest, but you can always call, leave a message, or reach me by email, and I will be happy to to answer any of your questions or your concerns, either as a follow-up to today's meeting or in general if you have any specific questions. And I just want to mention also that we're going to speak in general terms today about the IEP in general. Some of it might pertain to your child, some of it might not. But if you have a more specific question about specifically your child, just try not to get too specific when we talk about that. And if we need to follow up, you can leave me information and ask, and we will follow up with you to get more specific in terms of your specific child. Okay, so when we talk about special education, that includes services, programs, and specially designed instruction to meet the individual needs of a student with a disability. Students with disabilities who require special education services have an individualized education program, an IEP. Many of you have probably heard that term, an IEP, and that is the document that is created by a team, and that team includes you, the family, and it is a legal document, and it describes how the Department of Education will provide your child with a free and appropriate public education, right, at no cost to you, in the least restrictive environment, which means that we want to provide the services and make sure that your child is receiving the special education services in the best way possible that's closest to other typically developing students in the district. So we want to make sure that we're not removing them from the general education setting unnecessarily, and we want to be sure that we're trying our best to allow them to spend the most time in their school setting, in their classrooms, and to get the extra support and help that they need. And all that, how we would do that, and how much we can do that would all be documented in the IEP. And we'll see that tonight as we go through the different sections of the IEP. So I mentioned that the IEP team is made up of different members, including you're the family, the parents, guardians of the child, and the IEP team members that are required to attend an IEP meeting might differ depending on the type of meeting. So we might have an initial meeting for a child where it's the first time we're considering services for a child. We might have an annual meeting where we're meeting yearly to discuss the progress of the child, or we might be having a reevaluation meeting to determine if there needs to be any changes made to the program. So depending on that type of meeting, there might be different members attending the meeting or who are required to attend the meeting. And on the other side of the slide, you'll see the possible IEP team members. So parent is always invited and encouraged to participate in any IEP meeting. Then we would have also a district representative, and that's somebody usually from the school that will represent the district and have a knowledge of special education, have a knowledge of the programs that are available, and be able to finalize the decision of the IEP team. Sometimes we'll have a school psychologist from the school. Sometimes there'll be a special education teacher, or it could be a related services provider, such as a speech therapist or an occupational therapist. You might have the school social worker, might have a general education teacher. There may be times when you need a physician to participate in the meeting. Some meetings we would also provide a parent member to sit at the meeting, and that's a parent of a student with a disability who's there really to support parents at a meeting to help you understand the process better and to answer any questions you might have. Any individual that might be invited to the IEP meeting on the basis of the parent's determination that the individual has special expertise or knowledge of the student. And what that means is that you as a parent have the right to invite other people to the meeting as well that don't necessarily work for the school or the district, but that you feel might have some special expertise or knowledge of your child and you would like them to participate in the meeting. They can be invited in advance and they would become part of that IEP team. Okay, so let's start to delve into the actual IEP. We understand, we mentioned that the IEP is the legal document that outlines all the areas that we're concerned for and how we're going to provide supports for those areas. So the first section of the IEP is what's called the present levels of performance and individual needs. Sometimes it's called the PLOP, that's just short for that. And what that is a documentation of the student's current performance and academic, developmental, and functional needs. So really what we're doing in the PLOP, what we want to see written in the PLOP is basically where is the child at now? What levels are they at functionally, developmentally, academically? How are they doing in their current setting? If they've been in school already, how are they doing in school? If they haven't yet been in school, how are they doing at home or in any other setting? We want to identify all that and document it in the present levels of performance. Throughout the presentation, I'll show you examples of these that you might see on an IEP. So this will look similar if you have an IEP for your child. You may be familiar with some things that you'll see here. And I've highlighted the sections. Some of it might not look the same as your documentation, but it's just to understand where you might see this on the IEP and what that section might look like. So the first thing you would see is, as you can see in this one, you're always going to have either a cover page or the top of the IEP where you have identifying information of the student. So you have the student's name, their ID number, you'll have a classification, their disability. Sometimes you'll see autism, learning disability. We're not going to go into that tonight. That's the next session of our series if you want to join for that. You also have the date of the IEP meeting and when the services are going to be implemented and when there will be the next meeting, the yearly meeting. And then we start the section of present levels of performance, the PLOP. So the PLOP, like I said, is going to cover different academic areas. So sometimes you might see a paragraph about reading. Like, for example, in this one, you'll see there's reading. It talks about reading tasks and all those areas. And then it talks about writing. You might see a section, the next one is on math and ELA. So basically, since we're covering the different areas academically, you're going to see different paragraphs for different areas. You're also going to see a section for evaluation results. So if there were any testing that was done for the student, if the student had any evaluations that were done, you'll see a little, you'll see some documentation about that in terms of how they did on that test. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see the academic achievement, and that's where we're going into their, how they've been doing academically, not just their testing, but now actually how they are doing every subject, if there's areas of concerns or not. Just to mention that there are times that there will be a perception to parents that there's sometimes negative comments on an IEP, especially in this section of the IEP. But it's important to know that the reason that there may be something that's perceived as negative is because it's really important for the team to understand what areas, if any, does your child actually need support in. So while we definitely want to highlight the strengths, and that needs to be on the IEP as well, and I'll show you that in the next slide. As you can see over here, there's a highlighted student strengths, preferences, and interests, right? Over there, we want to definitely highlight the strengths of your child. Where do they excel at? What do they enjoy? What do they like? Those types of things we want to put that. But we also want to put in areas where they need support. Very important also, after each section, so after the academic section, then there's a section on social development, how they are interacting with peers and adults, how they are dealing with just understanding themselves and how they adjust to their environment. In each of those sections, like I mentioned, we're going to write, the team will be putting in the areas, how they are doing, any areas of concern. Then they're also going to mention their strengths. And then it's also very important to note your concerns as a parent. And that's the final section on each of these, including consideration of student needs that are of concern to the parent, right? We definitely want to include what we call parental voice into the IEP. So you want to be able to share with the team what your concerns are. Do you see areas where your child is struggling? Do you see areas where your child is doing very well? Do you see things that you would want your child to develop more? We want to include that in the IEP so that we can have a better plan of how we're going to help your child to achieve those goals. And finally, in terms of the development, the present levels, like I said, we'll have the academic, the social, and then you'll have actually the physical development as well. And it's the same format, right? Their current levels, the student strengths, and then any needs that are of concern, and specifically to the parent as well. We want to hear from you and put that onto the IEP as well. The next section that you'll see on the plot is the management needs. And the management needs, that includes the nature and degree to which environmental modifications, human resources, or material resources are required to enable the student to benefit from instruction. So basically what we're saying the management needs is we've outlined in the earlier section of the IEP what areas the child needs support with. Now we want to put in the management needs, what exactly do we need to put into place to support this child in those areas. So for example, you'll see on the screen for management needs, you see that this child would benefit from positive reinforcement, small group instruction, frequent teacher check-ins, right? These are things that we're building in for a human, for somebody to do that, right, in relationship to your child. Or we might have something physical like a graphic organizer or a content-based checklist, a checklist for your child to be using to be able to see what they need to do. So that's what goes in this section. It could be, again, something for a teacher or another adult to do in relation to your child, or something that we want to put in place physically for your child to utilize in order to develop appropriately. The next section would be the effect of student needs on involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. In this section, we want to document how the disability of the student, of your child, affects their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So we wanted to describe the effect of their disability, how it relates to their instructional content, in terms of their instructional method, how they're going to learn, their method of testing, the materials, the physical environment, All of these things we want to know. Okay, we've identified the needs of the student. We've identified the disability of the student. Now we know how is that going to affect their ability to learn and how they're learning. So, for example, when you look on the one that we have on the screen, it says that Ryan's speech language impairment is impacting his ability to function on grade level in reading, writing, and math. So we see that the disability that he has is affecting his ability to learn on grade level. And he's expected to fully access the general education curriculum by being placed in the integrated co-teaching classroom and getting counseling as related services and speech services as well. So we're writing down that the expectation is that we will see improvement with that by putting in these supports as well. And that's going to obviously affect his time in the general education classroom and his time with general education students, because he's going to be getting other services as well, such as counseling and speech services. And the final section in the plot that you see on the bottom of the screen is student needs relating to special factors. And this is if there's any specific special areas that your child that you have concerns with. For example, if the child needs behavior interventions to address any learning issues, so we would put that over there. If they have a specific behavior intervention plan to address their behaviors, we would note that over there. If they're a child who needs extra support because of their language needs, so they have limited English proficiency, we would put that over here as well. We would note that. We would note if the child is blind or visually impaired, and if they need support for that, as well as if they have any specific communication needs or need assistive technology to support them. So it might be a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, and they need a particular device, or a child who has, again, some type of speech impairment or learning disability where they need assistive technology to support them as well. We would note that in this section of the IEP. And that's the plot. That's a lot of information, and the plot is really, I would say, the foundation of the IEP. Right? We want to be as specific as we can in there to know how we're going to set up the rest of the IEP in terms of the plan and the supports for the child. Again, it's important that you provide input for that to the team so that they know how to support your child. And then it's also important that the team creates this in a way that's understandable to you. So we want to try as best we can as a team to make sure that we're not using too much jargon when we're writing this part of the IEP. We want it to be able to be understood by parents or to others who are not working in education to be able to understand exactly what we're talking about. The next section that you'll see on the IEP is the transition section. This is the measurable post-secondary goals. This is not going to be for every student, this section, but for a student that's age 14 or older, and sometimes at younger age, the IEP must include measurable post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate transition assessments and the student's preferences and interests as they relate to transition from school to post-school activities. And these goals must be updated at least annually. So what we're looking for over here is we're looking for specific goals based on the child's age and based on assessments that are appropriate for the child at that age to see what kind of goals we want for them in terms of transitioning out of school, when they're going to be leaving and entering either higher education or employment. We want to know what goals we have for them as they transition out of high school into that area of the world. And you would see a section like this on the IEP, measurable post-secondary goals. So we would list what kind of goals we want in terms of education or training, or what type of goals in terms of employment and independent living skills when appropriate, and then what kind of transition needs might they have. So it might include something about a course of study that the child might need to take because they want to get to a certain a goal. Specifically, if you have a child that's going to be going into a vocational track in terms of their future. So you want to identify courses in the curriculum that will prepare the student for that type of schooling after high school. They might need also transition needs. On the bottom, we're talking about transition needs. That might include adult assistance to travel in the community, might include instruction in functional reading and mathematics, or development of self-advocacy skills, right? Or independent use of public transportation. Anything that we would need to train the student to be able to really transition to being on their own when they're leaving school and moving out into the world. The next section that you would see in the IEP is the annual goals. The needs described in the present level of performance drive the development of the student's annual goals. So whatever we wrote down in the plot in the first part of the IEP, that's now going to be used to develop the goals. So because we identified the need in the first section, and now we're going to develop goals. What are we specifically going to work on this year in all the different areas to address those areas that need support? The IEP team must develop the goals before determining what kind of program or services will be recommended. Right? That's very important to know. We don't look at the child's needs and then say, okay, this child needs speech therapy. No, we look at what the child needs. We develop a goal to say what is it that we want them to attain this year, and then based on that goal, whether it's in math, literacy, speech, behavior, depending whatever they need, then we're going to look and say, okay, now we have these goals. Where can we address these goals? Do they need a special classroom? Do they need a speech a session? Do they need counseling? But that comes after we develop the goals. And we'll talk about that as well. Annual goals should be reasonable in number. So, for example, we want 3 or 4 goals targeted to address each area of need and achievable within 1 year, right? We want to make sure that we're putting something on paper that can actually be done. So we don't want to make the goals too lofty to try to get there. And we also don't want to have too many goals that we're not going to be able to address them within the year. The goals also must state specific, measurable, projected outcomes that, if achieved, would afford the student meaningful educational benefit for that year. So we're not just saying, oh, we'd like the child to be able to read by the end of the year. That's not a specific, measurable goal. We want to say specifically, what level we want to get them to, what skills we want them to develop in order to achieve a specific goal, and go from there. We want to be specific and want to be able to measure it, because throughout the year we want to see if the child is actually achieving that goal or not. So on this screen, you're going to see 3 examples of a goal. Okay, we have a speech and language goal, we have a reading goal, and we have a math goal. Okay, and so for each annual goal, the IEP does need to include the evaluation criteria, the method, and the schedule for progress monitoring, for measuring the progress of that goal. So the first part, you'll see the annual goal. That will be the actual goal. So for example, this student, for the speech goal, it says, within 1 year, Ryan will improve his expressive and receptive language abilities by identifying supporting details and main ideas, giving multi-sensory prompts and cues. Okay, so basically, we're looking for him to improve his language, where he's able to identify details and main ideas. And we're going to support him with that. Now, the criteria for meeting the goal is going to be the next section, and that's how are we going to measure what do we want him to get to. So, for example, in this one, you see 4 out of 5 trials over 3 consecutive sessions. Okay, we're building towards that goal. That's where we want him to get to, so that we can ensure that he's mastered this goal. Okay, it doesn't have to be 100%, right? We want to get him to a place where we feel comfortable that he's ready, he's mastered the goal. He's not always going to get it 100%. It has to be something that's reasonable. And then we want to have the method, how we're going to measure that. And that, for example, in this case, you have data collection. So the teacher is going to be collecting data, seeing how he's doing towards his goal, might be maybe using a checklist or being observation. The teacher or the speech therapist will be observing the student and seeing how they're doing in this goal. And then we want to have the schedule. How often are they going to be tracking this? So in this case, it's 1 time per month. Again, this is necessary for every single goal that we have. We're going to have to see how much do we want them to master in terms of this goal to know that we can move on to the next goal. How we're going to be checking on that goal, on the progress, and how often are we going to be collecting the data to measure that progress. Just a note, it's not on the screen, but there are certain students that might need short-term instructional goals. Generally, most students you will see like this, where they have an annual goal. There are short-term goals for those students that need more support and maybe are taking the New York State alternate assessment track, and they would have short-term goals where we're building up to a long-term goal for the year. Again, that's not most students. And again, you see 3 goals here. I would say, usually you'll see 2 or 3 per area. So let's say for math, for reading, and for speech and language. In this case, this child is obviously getting speech therapy. Okay, so like you saw on the previous slide, there's a schedule to collect the data and to measure the progress. The next most important thing is when we're measuring the progress is to actually report the progress to you as the parents. The IEP must indicate when periodic reports on the student's progress towards the annual goals will be provided to the parents. At a minimum, these reports must be provided at the same frequency and timing of reports provided to parents of general education students. So at least when the general report cards go out for the year, we want IEP reports to go out as well to the parents. But they should be provided more frequently to the extent reasonable and beneficial given the specific goals. Right? There might be a goal that the child is making progress more quickly, or we want them to make progress more quickly in that specific area, and we're targeting it. So then we might collect data more frequently, and we might want to share that more frequently with the parents because that might be something that we're working on together at that time. So we want to make sure that that's moving along. And this is what you would see on the IEP. The first part is the section where it outlines how often the reports will be sent to parents. So in this case, they wrote 5 times per year at Tuesday parent engagement. Okay. Generally, most of the time you'll see in this area, it will say whenever report cards are given through the school. So usually 3 or 4 times a year, and that's when the progress reports will be sent for the IEP students as well. And the actual progress report would look something like this. For every goal you would see the goal on top, and then you would see if it's the first progress report for the IEP, or the second report for the year, or the third and the fourth, and then you would see the report of progress. So how are they doing? And how are they doing in this case? They made progress. They haven't made progress. They made some progress. And then what you're anticipating for them to make for the year. Do we anticipate them to reach the goal for the year, or do we anticipate that more time will be needed in order to achieve this goal? Next section of the IEP is the recommended special education programs and services. The recommended special education programs and related services are based on an analysis of the student's previously determined present levels of performance. That's the PLOP that we spoke about, the first area, and the measurable annual goals, the goals that were developed based on the PLOP. So like I mentioned before, once we have the needs of the student in the PLOP, and then we've developed goals that we want to achieve, now we're going to develop an actual recommendation of where we're going to support the student in order to achieve those goals, and what services we're going to put in place in order to support him or her achieving those goals as well. And we want to be mindful that we want to try to do this in the least restrictive environment, which means, again, we want them as much as possible to limit the time that they would be out of or pulled out of a regular classroom. So before we get to that actual page of what it would look like, the recommended services page, just a note about the types of services that can be recommended. So we have an IEP continuum of services, and the continuum of services is basically what you see on the bottom of the slide, is all the different types of settings and supports that can be given to a student in order to receive their IEP services. We might have a student in a general education classroom with related services, right? For example, they're in a general education classroom, but they're also getting speech therapy, or they may be in a general education classroom with special education teacher support services, SETS. So they have a special education teacher either working with them in the classroom or pulling them out in a small group. They might be in an integrated co-teaching class where you have 2 teachers, one for students with IEPs and one general education teacher, and you have a portion of the class is students with IEPs, and the rest of the class is typically developing students. Or you might have an actual special class where everyone in the class has an IEP, and the teacher is a special education teacher, and the class is purposely small, not more than 12 students, so they can address the specific individualized needs of those students. Students that might need more support might be in District 75, where the entire school is students with IEPs. or some students may have a day residential placement or home and hospital instruction. There's obviously a more rare, and those are for students who cannot, their needs cannot be addressed in a school setting, such as a community school or District 75, and they need additional supports, and therefore they will be recommended for that. I put the blue arrow going up and down on the side of those, just to make the point that a student can be in any one or multiple of these settings at any time in their education. So we might have a student that is in a special class for some subjects, and yet they move into an ICT and integrated co-teaching class for other subjects, right? And they can weave in and out of those different recommendations because it really depends on where the student is. And like I said, we want to always make sure that we're providing these services in the least restrictive environment for the student. And that can change as the student changes. Sometimes they'll need more support, sometimes they'll need less support. So we want to make sure that we're addressing the student and making sure that we're individualizing their support for them at that time. Same thing, you might have a child who's in a community school and at a certain point needs to move to District 75, and at a certain point may move from District 75 to a community school, again, depending on how they're doing and the supports that they continue to need. So this is an example of what it might look like, the recommended special education programs and services section of the IEP. So as you'll see on the left side, you'll have the actual program and services. So in this case, for example, you'll see SETS, that's the Special Education Teacher Support Services. And the next part, you'll see the next column is the service delivery recommendation. So is it going to be in a group? Is it going to be individual? What's going to be the language of instruction? Is it going to be direct, meaning working with the student? Sometimes we have the teacher working with the teacher in the classroom to support the student. So you might see that. And then the next column is the frequency. How often is this service being provided? Are we going to be recommending it for? So in this case, for example, they're recommending the sets for 5 times per week. Okay. And how long will that be? The next column says duration. So for all of these, it's a period. And usually the IEP will mirror the periods in the school. However long those periods are, that's how long we want to take the student out, or provide them with the service. And then we have, very importantly, the location. So in this case, when we're talking about sets, in this case, it's the general education classroom. So what that means is the teacher is going to be working in the classroom with the student to support them. If you look at the third row, it says special education teacher support services again for social studies. And in that case, the location is actually the sets room. So in that case, the teacher will be pulling the student out of the classroom, right, and working with them in probably individually, it looks like, working with them individually and working with them on their social studies goals. Okay, so for every subject, we would see the specific service that we're recommending, how often we're recommending that, and for how long, and again, the location where that's going to be provided. And there's also usually a projected date of service of when that's going to start. Okay, and sometimes you'll see actually an end date as well. So sometimes services don't run the whole year. Sometimes you want it for a few months or for half the year, and we'll list that on the IEP. We'll have a start date and an end date to show when that specific service will be ending. You would also see on the same page, you would see the next section would be the related services. And the related services and any type of services that are there to support the goals either within the classroom or outside the classroom. So, for example, this child is being recommended for counseling services to work either on their behavior or their social development, and they're being recommended in a group again. Like we said, it's going to say what type of recommendation it is. It's going to be in English in a group. How often? Twice per month. For how long? The duration is 30 minutes. And this one is going to be in a separate location in the counselor's office. And you see the same thing for the speech therapy as well. And then you have the start date. And again, you might have other options. You might see occupational therapy in this area. You might see physical therapy as well. You might also see in this area parent counseling and training. And parent counseling and training is assisting parents in understanding the special needs of their child and providing parents with information about child development and helping parents to acquire the necessary skills that will allow them to support the implementation of their child's IEP. So again, parent counseling and training, if you see that on an IEP, that's really for you as the parents to either attend a group session or individual session or some kind of training at the school or at the district in order for you to understand the needs of your child and to be able to support them with achieving their goals. Parent counseling and training must be recommended to all students with a classification of autism, regardless of what the student's program recommendation is. Sometimes you'll see supplementary aids and services program modifications and accommodations. As you can see on the screen after the speech therapy, we see that row. And what that refers to in that section, um, any supports that we would need to put in place to enable the student to be educated with non-disabled students to the maximum extent appropriate. So in that section, you might see a paraprofessional being recommended for a student, and that's another adult to work with the student either one-on-one or in a group, either to support them with their behaviors or to support with any health needs that they might have, maybe to monitor their health. So you might have a health para, or you might have a toileting para for certain students that need help and support with toileting or toileting training. So you would see that in that room. A nurse would go in that area as well of supplementary aids for our students who have health needs where they require nursing, either one-on-one or in a group, or even if the school nurse can address it to a certain extent, but you would still see that on the IEP as well. Assistive technology, we spoke about that a little bit earlier. If there's a student with a speech issue or a learning disability that requires some type of assistive technology, even a child maybe with some motor difficulties, maybe they have a laptop to support them. Instead of writing, they're using a laptop to type. Also, those types of assistive technology you would see listed over here on the IEP in that row as well. And finally, you might see something for supports for school personnel on behalf of the student. And what you might see over there is maybe some training that's being implemented for the staff that's working with your child in order to support them as they provide the services to your child. Okay, the next section would be the extended school year services. A student must be recommended for extended school year services if it's necessary to prevent substantial regression over the summer. So we're talking about extended school year, right? We know that generally the school year runs from September to June, and then students get the summer off. Although in New York City we do have the summer rising program, that's not really as much of an academic program as more of something more extracurricular. And it's not mandated. Extended school year would be for students that we're concerned that over the summer they're going to lose a significant amount of the growth that they've done over the year, and therefore we want them to be in a structured special education program for additional 6 weeks in the summer as well. And so that's the extended school year services. We need to consider this at the IEP meeting, and we need to document it on the IEP if that's something that we're going to recommend. As per New York State guidance, a student will be eligible for a 12-month service or program. And again, it doesn't have to be a full program. It could be just a service as well. Let's say just occupational therapy over the summer. But it's the child is eligible when the period of review or reteaching required to recoup the skill or knowledge level that was attained by the end of the year is beyond the time that's ordinarily reserved for that purpose at the beginning of the school year. So generally, we would say most children come back and they need some reteaching in the beginning of the year, right? That's perfectly normal. That's typical. Children are off when they come back. Any good teacher will start with a little review of where we ended off, and we're going to build on that. But then we have those students that we're talking about substantial regression. So they're going to be coming back, and they're going to be 6 to 8 weeks behind in terms of their knowledge of what was taught. If that's the case, then they would have to be recommended for extended school year services. And this is how it might be documented on the IEP. You would see this section, 12-month service and or program, and we would see student is eligible to receive it, yes or no. That would be marked off for July and August. And if yes, we're going to list out specifically the services or the program that the child is going to be recommended for the summer. And you notice that the layout is almost exactly what we just had for the recommended services. Because again, we want to list the actual program of the service. We want to list how that's going to be delivered individually, in a group, what language, the frequency, how often, the duration, how long it's going to be, and the location, and when that's going to be started. Um, this does not have to be the same services that the student was getting throughout the year. So a student could be, for example, in a special class throughout the year, but they're doing well enough that they don't need that support in math, ELA, and those subjects during the summer. However, the child maybe has a significant speech delay or significant motor delay where they would need to continue with the speech therapy or the occupational therapy over the summer. And so we would list that here, even though during the year they do get more than that, but over the summer they really only need that part of this program. So we would list that over here that they're going to get a little bit of a different program over the summer, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, the next section, moving along, will be the testing accommodations. Testing accommodations are changes to the test format and or test administration and are intended to remove any barriers and increase access. They're not intended to make tests less rigorous, and they don't change the skills or content that the test is designed to measure. So the student, we're not changing the content of the test for the student. They're taking the same test. The only thing is that they're getting certain accommodations so that they can access that test and have the ability to take the test. The IEP team must consider what testing accommodations, if any, are appropriate to support the student by considering the student's individual needs. So again, this is always going to be individualized, just as everything else on the IEP, right? We're going to look at the plot. We're going to look at all the areas. We're going to look at the goals. We're going to look at the progress and see what is it that this student needs in order to be successful when we want to assess them on a test. We want to make sure that we're giving them the best ability for them to show what they have learned, what they have gained. So these are some examples of certain testing accommodations that you might see on the test. On the IEP. So a student might not need any. So you might see none for testing accommodations, and that's perfectly fine. You might also see extended time. So in this case, we would list the condition of how we want that being done. So for example, it's going to be for any test that exceeds 45 minutes. And then how much time do we want to give them? How we're going to be implementing it for time and a half. So that's the amount of time that we're going to be giving them. Another accommodation might be separate location. Again, how do we want to address that and how we're going to implement that? So you would see all these specifics in the testing accommodations. It's important also that when we're recommending testing accommodations, that it's not only for the state tests. This is something that we want. First of all, if we're going to put it on the IEP, it should be used across the board for different assessments throughout the year, not only state tests. And we also want there to be enough time for the student to develop, comfortability with those accommodations. If the student is used to always taking the test, for example, in the classroom, and now for the state test, we want to take them into a small room with just them and a couple of students, that might throw them off. So we want them to be able to adjust to those accommodations. So we definitely want these put in place prior to the state test. But again, we want also, it's important that these accommodations are being done routinely throughout different types of assessments in the classroom, state test, city, district assessments, and not only for the state test. Okay, the next section is the coordinated set of transition activities. So we spoke earlier about the goals, the transition goals for those students that are age 14 and older. And in this case, what we want to do, we had those goals earlier, but now the IEP team must consider the student's strengths, preferences, and interests, and then identify activities, services, and supports that are necessary to facilitate the student's movement from school to post-school activities. So again, we're looking at what's the trajectory of the student, where are they planning to head to after school, right? After high school, which track are they going to, where would they like to go? And we're going to put in the activities and the services and the supports that we need to implement for them to be successful in those areas that they're choosing. And we will list out over here, the different areas. Instruction, maybe they need to learn something specifically. So how are they going to be doing that? What service or what activity are we going to provide for them in order to learn whatever skill it is that they need to learn, and who's going to be responsible for that. It could be the school district. It might be an outside agency, right? And we would list that and document that on the IEP. Same thing, related services, might be speech services or occupational therapy services the child might need in order for them to be able to transition, community experiences, um, acquisition of daily living skills, if applicable, different areas that we want to look at, specific again to the students' needs of where we need to hone in and focus and what activities can we provide to them to support them as they transition to post school. Okay, moving towards the last couple of sections of the IEP, and a very important section towards the end of the IEP is the participation section. All students with disabilities must be included in state or district-wide assessment programs. There are alternate assessments that are used to evaluate the performance of students with severe cognitive disabilities who are unable to participate in general education assessments, even with testing accommodations. If the IEP team determines that the student will participate in alternate assessment, the IEP must document why the student cannot participate in the regular assessment. So that's the first part. How are we testing the student? Again, most students, even students with disability, will be included in the same tests, the same state and district-wide assessments that all students are getting. There is a small percentage of students with severe cognitive disabilities who will be alternatively assessed, and they won't take those tests. They'll be taking a different type of test, and because they cannot perform based on their disability, even with testing accommodations. That needs to be documented on the IEP. What is it, and specifically why is that? Okay, what are we seeing that we decided to make this decision for that? Also, the IEP has to detail the extent, if any, to which a student will not participate in regular class and or extracurricular and other non-academic activities with non-disabled peers. And we have to justify why that would be. So, for example, if the student is being pulled out of class for services, if the student is being put in a special class where all the students are students with disabilities, all of that needs to be documented in the section of the IEP and justified. We need to know why was this recommended and what is holding the student back from participating in a general environment, a general classroom, or other activities. Also, if the student will not participate in regular physical education, the IEP has to indicate the extent to which the student will participate in specially designed instruction in physical education, including adapted physical education, which we specifically modified to support the student's needs. And the IEP must indicate if a student identified as having a disability would affect their ability to learn a language will be exempt from the language other than English requirement of the local regions or advanced regions diplomas. Obviously, that's for our older students. But again, we would have that listed as well if the student would not be eligible to take that requirement. This is an example of that section of the IEP and how it would look. So you'd have the first part of participation in state and district-wide assessments. Again, most students will say that the student will participate in the same state and district-wide assessments of the students. For some students, they will participate in alternate assessment. Participation with students without disabilities. Again, over here, we would have to write either if it's a preschool student or if it's a school-age student, we're going to be writing down if there's any exclusion for them and why. Why is it that they cannot participate? And if they are participating in certain areas, then we should list that. You know, let's say they'll be together for certain parts of the day. We can list that on this section of the IEP as well, even if they're being removed for other sections of the day. Special transportation is also a section on the IEP where we are recommending specialized transport for the student. So if there's no available means of non-specialized transportation that would enable a student with a disability to travel to and from school safely and to benefit from instruction, they would require specialized transportation. And this has to be recommended on the IEP. So again, we're looking to see, is it possible for the student to get to school, you know, just like other students might get to school, either public transportation or other ways, walking, whatever that might be? Or is it due to their disability that they are unable to do that, and now we need to provide them with specialized transportation, which would be a bus from the closest safe curb location to school, but may also include other necessary transportation accommodations, such as maybe having a paraprofessional with them on the bus or limited travel time on the bus as well. Those are the types of things that we would consider when looking at specialized transportation. And again, you would see that this section on the IEP would be marked off, either none, the student does not need special transportation, or student does need special transportation accommodations, and then we would list specifically what it is that they need. In certain areas, for certain accommodations, we would need medical documentation from the doctor, and this would have to be reviewed by the Office of School Health, by a physician, to determine whether or not the child is really in need of that level of support. Finally, the IEP needs to list the placement recommendation. The IEP must indicate the placement recommended for the student. Now, placement refers to the type of school or setting where the student's IEP will be implemented. It does not refer to the specific school the student will attend. So, for example, it might say, and we'll show you on the next page, right? Over here, you will see the placement recommendation. So, for example, over here it says New York City DOE school non-specialized district 1 to 32. That means a community school district. So, a community public school. Again, it doesn't list which one. You're not going to see on an IEP PS 25, for example. It's just going to say the type of setting, right? That goes through a different process of specifically what school. And the same thing if it was a specialized school. For example, if the student was being recommended for District 75, that would be listed here as well. And again, not the specific school, just the type of school, and then we would go from there and identify a school. Lastly, you'll have a summary page on the IEP, and it really just is what it sounds like. It summarizes everything that we spoke about. So we'll have the student's information, it'll have the IEP information, when the meeting was held, what type of a meeting it was. It'll show the instructional and functional levels in reading and math for the student so that we understand where they are for reading and math instructionally. So, for example, the student is second grade, right? The student might not actually be in second grade, but their levels of learning instruction might actually be on second grade. So we want to document that on the IEP as well. Also, we would note in this section, also if the child has any medical or health treatments that are necessary during the day, if there's any physical limitations, if there's any behavioral concerns, this will be listed over here on the summary page. Also, we're going to list in the summary page a repeat of the recommendation and the services that we're recommending would be on the summary page as well. And also importantly, we would list the promotional criteria, whether or not this student will be held to standard promotional criteria, so that they're going to have to pass the same levels as everyone else in the classroom, in the same methods that are used for everyone else in the classroom, to know if they should progress to the next grade, or are they going to have modified promotional criteria, which means that the teacher is going to develop a certain percentage and a different method to look at in order to develop, to determine if the student learned the material and is ready to move on to the next level or not. Oh, actually, I have it here. I didn't realize I had a picture of it. Okay. So here you would see the classification, the recommended services, the related services, whether or not they're participating in the assessments, 12-month services, any medical concerns, any accessibility concerns, and then again, their promotional criteria. Oh, and very important, the last section you will see here is what other options were considered. So remember, we spoke about having the student in the least restrictive environment. So we're going to list out what other programs did we consider. If we're putting this child in a special class, did we consider having them in general education? Did we consider having them just getting related services or being in an integrated class? We're going to list whatever we considered at that meeting, and then we're going to list why that was rejected. So we're going to write down, the team will write down what is it that cannot be addressed in that setting and why they need a more restrictive setting and how that would benefit the child. This area might also be a place where you might see if there's ever disagreement between your parents, yourselves, and the school team. So generally, we try to come to consensus at the end of the meeting. That's not always possible. So in that case, you might see in this area of other options considered also either something that the parent wanted to consider or the team wanted to consider, but then it was decided to go one way or the other, and that would be listed over here as well. And finally, we have the attendance page, which is also a very important component of the IEP because we want to, as this is a legal document, a legal process, and we want to ensure that your rights, have not been infringed. So we want to make sure that everybody who needed to be at the meeting was at the meeting, and that's all documented. Again, the student's name, the date of the meeting, and everybody who was there, including yourselves and anybody else who was there, needs to put their signature and sign, or if they participate by telephone, we will note that as well, and you will get a copy of this attendance sheet with your IEP. Of course, at any IEP meeting, you are entitled to have translation and interpreter services, meaning that either you could have an interpreter at the meeting, or you could have prior or post-meeting a translation of the child's IEP assessments or any notices. You simply need to ask for that, and we will provide that, again, either at the meeting or if it's documents before or after the meeting as well. So that concludes this presentation. Just a note about we're going to have 2 more in this series before we open up to questions right now. We're going to have another session in January, another one in March. The next session we'll talk about the specific disability classifications and being eligible for special education. And the third one we'll have in March is about understanding the kindergarten IEP process. For those families that might be going through that this year, that is a confusing process. So we do a session on that as well. So please join us for those as well. More information will come out as we get closer to that. And again, you have the District 25 contact information over here. If you have any questions, you can always email, phone, or text. We do have assistance available in Spanish and Chinese. And also, you have my personal information. You can always email me as well. And Louis has been sharing these slides with everyone in the chat. And this will be sent out as well. So you can follow up with that. At this point, I'll stop sharing, and I'm going to open up to see if there's any questions in the chat.
We do have one question that I'll read for everyone. I just want to just highlight that the recording of this session will be uploaded to YouTube tomorrow. So I dropped our YouTube channel link in the chat. If you subscribe to us, you should get notified when we upload that video tomorrow. And then in the video description will actually be the links to all the slides. Everything will be all on that YouTube video, which is really helpful. So the question I saw was, how does a child qualify for test services? So I'm thinking maybe that means testing accommodations.
Yeah, I guess so. So for test accommodations, that is something you can bring to the attention of your team if that's a concern. You can write a letter and bring it to the school and tell them that you want to consider that for your child. And they're going to be looking at a few different areas. They're going to be looking at your child's levels of performance, their levels of learning, their abilities, their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, they're going to be looking at how your child has been doing on tests throughout the year prior, either the state test that was prior as well as the testing during the year. And specifically, we're not just looking at, do they do well or not? It's really the environment, the testing environment. Is that affecting their ability to do well or not, right? So some children maybe need that smaller room. Some children need longer time, right? So the teacher should be able to assess that based on what they're seeing throughout the year in the classroom when they're doing their assessments and, monitoring that. And if they're not noticing it and you want to bring that to their attention, you can definitely bring it to the teacher's attention and have them explain to you what they see. Maybe they don't see something like that, and you can discuss that with them.
And I also want to just invite everyone that if you want to raise your hand and unmute yourself, you can also do that. Karen asked a great question, which I hear a lot, Nathan. After an evaluation for an assistive technology device, how long does it take for the child to get the technology? I hear
It's
this
a
one
great
a lot.
question, Karen. Thank you. So just a quick word on the process. So the first step is the evaluation. Once the evaluation is done, the IEP, and if the device is recommended, the IEP team needs to convene and meet with you and add the actual device to the IEP. That's the first step. Once it's added to the IEP, so after the meeting, then they will submit the request, and then the Center for Assistive Technology, which is our department for assistive technology, they will get that request and they will start to process that. They are processing requests citywide for the entire city. It's one office that handles the entire city. and so they respond to those requests in the order that they're received. So our district doesn't get anything up over anybody else. It really goes citywide as they come in. That's how they're addressed. I would say generally in the past, sometimes it's taken about a month or two. This year was a little bit more difficult because there was a backlog due to supply chain issues that were nationwide, and that really affected us as well. So because of that, there was a backlog. I've been told that last year's orders have all been fulfilled now. So that backlog is they're up to date with that, but now they're addressing this year again in the order which they received it. So that is going to take a little bit of time for it to get there.
And I just want to add, Karen, if you are experiencing some delays with assistive technology, email Nathan. He might be able to help, or at least get you some information.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Um,
sure,
you
no
got it.
problem.
You got it.
Yeah, there might be
Uh,
something technical also, so you might want to just reach out so we can just look in, make sure everything is documented properly, everything was submitted properly, make sure all
mhm.
that's done. If all that is done, then it's just a matter of time.
And it also depends on the type of device. I know, we weren't able to purchase Apple products for the beginning. So if it's an iPad, we just are now able to order iPads again. So that also kind of can add some time to that as well. Um, Cynthia asked a really great question, which maybe if you can touch upon transitions between grade levels and schools. What if you want changes to the IEP moving forward now that the child is going to middle school?
Good question. I mean, it kind of depends on the change. So, every child is going to have an annual review. Like we said, once a year, you're going to have a review. And if this is the year that it's going to be the last meeting that you're going to have before the child goes to middle school, then you definitely want to have those types of discussions with the team to discuss. Are there going to be any changes? There might be a change in terms of the class makeup, the class size, the different types of supports for the different subjects. Right, as the child moves along, middle school is definitely different than elementary school. So you want to have those discussions and see, and if any changes need to be made, they would be made there. There is a way to document on the IEP if we want the changes to be in effect for September. That's okay. Also, like I showed you earlier, there's a start date and end date on the recommended services section. So there are times that we might want to have a recommendation continue for the rest of the school year, and then a more appropriate one for middle school to start in September. That's perfectly okay as well. But it's something that you would discuss with the team, especially if you have concerns now, in terms of what you might want to incorporate into the IEP for that. But I will say also that a lot of times this does come up. Parents do ask certain questions, and they do want certain things to be on an IEP in anticipation of middle school. And a lot of times it's not appropriate because we really need to wait to see how the child will be doing once they get to middle school. We generally it's not really major changes that are happening from elementary to middle. I would say more from middle to high school would be a different story. But from elementary to middle, it's not a major change, and therefore we're not generally going to see too much changes on the IEP. But it's more of an anxiety that I see with parents when they reach out to me in terms of them being concerned because they feel that it would be more rigorous and a little bit more demand in middle school. So they want to, preempt that by having more supports for their child, which is not always the best thing because we really want to see how the child will adjust first in that new setting and see, what supports the school can provide. Also, besides for the IEP, because remember, we're always looking at least restrictive environment. We want to make sure that we're not overburdening the child with all these special education services and really excluding them from other areas, especially when it comes to middle school. And the social component is definitely greater than in elementary school. So we want to make sure that we're being mindful of that and and making sure that we're not doing too many things that will restrict the student now when they're going into middle school and and they really don't want to be pulled out for those subjects necessarily. Maybe they don't want to continue with certain areas. They want to be more with their groups, with their friends, with their classes at that time. So we want to be mindful of that and maybe adjust accordingly for that.
All right. Are there any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat and we can read it for you. We're a little bit over time, but that's okay. If there's any more questions, we can definitely address them. Um,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Do you have another question, Cynthia, or are you okay?
Actually, it's more of like transition because they're asking. Well, the school is actually saying that Santina would do better in a nest program. So I think that's more
Hmm.
of an offline kind of a question.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really what my concern was because they're actually saying he would do better in that kind of a program, but was told that
Hmm.
seats are limited. So it's like a
They
little,
are.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
those seats are limited, and I think Nathan will agree that if that's like a recommendation, you definitely should go and visit those programs. I think you can see how they are.
Yeah,
Um,
and just a note on that is, generally there's a separate application process for our um, um, ASD programs for students with autism, and including Nest and Horizon. And what happens is you can apply first, and then they may come observe. They'll look at all the paper, they'll do a review of everything, and then if the IEP needs to be modified in order to adjust to their program because they do have different modifications in terms of the classrooms, they would do that after the child is accepted. So you don't have to be too concerned about the IEP yet, but you could definitely start the application, ask questions about what that program would look like, maybe visit a school or reach out to one of those schools that has that program and discuss it. And then if ultimately he's accepted to that program, then you would have the option to adjust the IEP just to reflect their program.
and I think what Nathan said was important about it being a separate application. You can still do your regular middle school application or still have a seat at your own school and apply to the NEST program as well. So.
they're two separate. Okay, great. I
I
didn't
think
know
that
that.
was you're not choosing now. You can leave it as an option, and then if you choose that it's not right for your child, then you just don't go that route.
All right, great. Thank you both so very much.
You're welcome.
So I see parents of Noah and Liam, is there a way to have homework removed and that type of recommendation be permanent on the IEP? We have a huge struggle on the work that is assigned. The school works with us, but every semester I find myself in this situation where the homework is an issue in that they can't do it independently. I mean, that's a good question. Um, I, I mean, generally there is an expectation that we want follow up when we present work, so we definitely want some level of follow up for home or maybe for after school program that we want the student to just reinforce whatever they're learning in school. But we also definitely don't want it to be a struggle for the child. So I don't think we would necessarily phrase it on the IEP as not having homework, but possibly in the management needs of this of the section of the IEP, we would put in there what type of work that the student might be better off doing, and those are the types of supports we want to see. So maybe we want to modify the type of assignments or the type of work that's being given to the student, so not to eliminate it completely, but just to really document to understand the needs of the specific student, and what is it that they need to be successful when they're doing work independently. You know, like you're saying, there are certain things that they can't do independently. So then we should list that in the management needs, saying what type of work that they should be given. Um, why is an attachment to homework? No, I don't think it's not clear. I think we should be clear about it in the management needs. I just I'm just noting that to completely remove homework necessarily, I don't think is the best route for that. I think we really just want to modify the type of work, and not only homework. I mean, this is something if it's affecting them in the homework, it should be affecting them in the classwork as well. There is an expectation of independent work in the classroom as well. So I would also have a conversation with the teachers of, what are they being expected to do in the classroom, and how are they doing that? What supports are there for them in the classroom, and now how can we continue that when they're getting work to do at home as well, the same way that it may be modified in the classroom. What can we do for that when they're getting work sent home as well? Because we want them to be successful. So I think it's more of a conversation with the teacher first, maybe administration if we need more support. But again, I'm not saying not to put it on the IEP. I think we can put a modification on the IEP, but I don't think the modification would be not to have homework. It would be just the type of work in the classroom and at home.
We also
Yes.
have a hand raised. So Kamisha Allen, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask your question.
Hi, good evening. Thank
Hi.
you. I just had one question because I guess to some extent I didn't fully understand the IEP document that was sent to me by the school. I know that you guys had went through the document. I was trying to verify whether the section that speaks about testing accommodation, if that would be the area in which I'll find what my son would be qualified for as it relates to either test read, revised test direction, extended time, etc.
Yep.
So he does have it on the IEP, now you're saying?
Well, she's
I'm
asking,
seeing
is that the section?
I see a section that says implementation recommendation, and I'm seeing for some areas that he would not qualify. He would qualify. The conditions are that all classroom and standardized tests, he would get it except for those measuring reading comprehension, and that was for the test read. And
Yeah.
then for the extended time, I'm seeing something here, time and a half. And it says on task focusing prompts. It says so all classroom and standardized tests, verbal and non-verbal prompts provided to Jaden every 50 minutes of testing or when he appears off task.
Yeah, that would be the testing accommodation section.
Okay.
Yeah, and definitely, and you could, you could speak with I mean, the reading comprehension section, that is appropriate. Most times you would not want it for the reading comprehension because we're actually testing the reading comprehension. So if we would, implement that for the test read, so then we wouldn't be able to test their actual comprehension. So that's perfectly normal. And if you're having trouble understanding any part of that, specific to him, what exactly that's going to mean for him in terms of the test, definitely that is the area you would want to ask the school or the teacher, saying, okay, I see this, I'm happy that this is here, but I just want to know, like, practically speaking, what exactly does that mean now? What is that going to look like for him? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, and thank you so much.
All right. Are there any other questions? All right. Like we discussed earlier, the recording of this session will be uploaded to our YouTube channel tomorrow. So you can, if you missed any parts of it, you can watch from the beginning. You can also share it with other people. And in the video description will be links to the slides as well. All those resources are available. And I also want to make sure that everyone remembers that we have two more special ed workshops coming up later this school year or in next calendar year. So on Monday, January 12th, we have a session on understanding disability classifications and special education eligibility. And then in March, we'll be talking about the kindergarten IEP process, also known as KIP. And we go over those students who are turning 5 years old and entering kindergarten with an IEP and what that process looks like. That session's a little bit targeted to a certain grade level, but it's still a very important session for everyone that has those students to attend. So if there are no other questions, we're going to call it a night. And again, like I said, we will post the recording tomorrow. Nathan, anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. Thank you again, everybody, for participating. Thanks, Louis, for the technical assistance. And have a great night, everybody.
All right, cool.
Yeah, thank you for being here and for your advocacy for kids. I do encourage you, if more things come up, and share with us what else you need, so we can be there to support you. But thank you so much for being here. Everyone have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Enjoy your families.
Thanks,
Yep.
Dr. Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
guys. Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Nathan. Thank you.
Talk to you tomorrow, Nathan.